Hello, my name is Theodore Waters, also known as Ted, Arcadia University ED599, Culminating Master's Project. I am currently a digital art and photography teacher in the School District of Philadelphia. For the last 3 years, I was at John B. Kelly Elementary School in Germantown section of Philadelphia, teaching K-5 elementary students digital art and photography. I focus on creating student-centered process-based art experiences that encourages creativity and confidence. Though the students are more engaged when they experiment without the pressure of creating a perfect piece of art. Usually sketchbooks and visual journaling encourages creativity, reflection, and risk-taking while helping students learn from mistakes. My graduate studies in K-12 art education reinforced my belief that meaningful art instruction values exploration, student voice, and the creative process over perfection. How do sketchbooks and visual journaling support student creativity, risk-taking, reflection, and artistic growth in a contemporary K-12 art classroom? This question arose from my experiences as an elementary school art teacher and my ongoing desire to better understand how instructional practices can cultivate creative thinking and meaningful artistic engagement. The goals of the studies are to examine how sketchbook encourage creativity, experimentation, and idea development, explore how visual journaling supports student reflection and artistic growth, investigate how sketchbooks create a safe space for creative risk-taking and learning from mistakes, connect current research with classroom experiences to improve instructional practice, promote teaching strategies that prioritize the creative practice over the final product. The significance in art education highlights the value of process-based learning in a contemporary K-12 art education classroom. Demonstrates how sketchbooks foster creativity, resilience, and student agency, supports instructional practices that encourages experimentation, reflection, and problem solving. Reinforce national and state visual art standards that emphasize creating, revising, and reflecting. Provides educators with research-based strategies for developing confident, creative, and reflective young artists. So why sketchbooks? Sketchbooks have evolved from simple planning tools into essential instructional resources that make students' thinking visible. They encourage learners to embrace experimentation, learn from mistakes, reflect on their artistic decisions, and develop confidence and identity as artists throughout the creative process. Traditional sketchbooks flow as planning, practice, final artwork. Sketchbooks were traditionally viewed as a place to plan composition, practice drawing techniques, and complete preliminary sketches before creating a final artwork. They primarily served as an organizational tool that emphasized preparation for a final product. Versus contemporary art education views sketchbooks as dynamic learning environments where students generate ideas, experiment with materials, reflect on their thinking, revise their work, solve problems, and develop artistic identity over time. Rather than focusing solely on finished products, sketchbooks support creativity, risk-taking, reflection, and artistic growth through an ongoing process of inquiry. The sketchbook becomes a continuous visual record of learning rather than simply a place for preliminary drawings. As you can see, there's a flow chart of contemporary sketchbooks starting out with observe, moving on to explore, experiment, reflect, revise, create, grow, and the cycle continues to observe, explore, and repeats itself. Literature review. Throughout my research, I found four emerging themes between the articles I found that dive into creativity and idea development, reflective thinking, risk-taking and resilience, and identity development. For creativity and idea development, Thompson, 1995, argued that sketchbooks should be spaces where children investigate ideas through curiosity and imagination by asking, "What should I draw today?" Students become responsible for generating their own ideas instead of relying on teacher-directed solutions. Now, Cummings in 2011 found that visual journaling engages students by allowing them to combine drawing, writing, collage, and mixed media. This flexibility helps students develop ideas gradually and respond to prompts in personally meaningful ways. Williams and Shield in 2025 reported that art teachers view sketchbooks as essential instructional tools that support creativity, idea development, divergent thinking, and student ownership of learning. In 2024, Coker found that visual journaling creates opportunities for students to construct meaning through ongoing reflection and creative inquiry. Rather than simply recording artwork, sketchbooks become a place or in a space where students connect experiences, ideas, and artistic decisions over time. Williams and Devin in 2020 described sketchbook as spaces where ideas evolve through observation, revision, and meaning making. They emphasize that sketchbook documents students' thinking and artistic development, making the learning process visible rather than focusing only on the final artwork. Cummings in 2011 explained that visual journaling combines drawing, writing, collage, and mixed media, allowing students to move fluidly between artistic experimentation and written reflection. This integration deepens creative thinking and personal meaning making. Risk-taking and resilience. Risk-taking and resilience. Mark in 2024 found that creative development occurs through iterative cycles of making, reflecting, revising, and experimenting. The study argues that mistakes and uncertainty are productive learning experiences that help students solve complex artistic problems. Wilcox in 2027 argued that visual journals create psychological safe environments where students feel safe and comfortable taking creative risks. By shifting the emphasis from evaluation to exploration, sketchbooks reduce students' fear of failure and encouraged. William and Shields in 2025 reported that art teachers view sketchbooks as instructional tools that encourage students to think independently, explore multiple solutions, and engage more deeply in the creative process. This emphasis on divergent thinking supports students' willingness to take creative risk. Identity development. De La Cruz and Bales in 2010 argued that portfolios, scrapbooks, and sketchbooks allowed students to create personal narratives through image and text. Sketchbooks become spaces where learners document experiences, tell stories, and construct meaning through visual expression. Williams and Devin in 2020 found that sketchbooks support artistic identity by allowing ideas to evolve over time through sustained engagement and reflection. Their traveling sketchbook project also demonstrated how students develop appreciation for both similarities and differences through shared visual storytelling. Coker in 2024 found that visual journaling supports meaning making by providing individuals with a space to reflect on personal experiences and express emotions through art. The study illustrates how visual journaling gives individuals a voice through the process. Key takeaways: creativity and idea development. The literature consistently demonstrates that sketchbooks are more than planning tools. They are learning environments where students generate ideas, explore possibilities, revise their thinking, and develop creativity through sustained artistic inquiry. Reflective thinking. The literature also suggests that reflection is not an activity reserved for the end of an art project. Instead, sketchbooks serve as an ongoing space where students document their thinking, make meaning from their experiences, revise ideas, and develop deeper understanding throughout their creative process. Risk-taking and resilience. The literature consistently demonstrates that sketchbooks provide low-risk environments where students can experiment, make mistakes, revise ideas, and persevere through artistic challenges. By emphasizing exploration over perfection, sketchbooks help students build resilience, confidence, and the willingness to take creative risks as part of the learning process. For identity development, the literature demonstrates that sketchbooks are more than instructional tools. They are spaces where students develop artistic identity, express personal and cultural experiences, and construct meaning through visual storytelling. By encouraging authentic self-expression and reflection, sketchbooks help students grow not only as artists, but also as individuals. Research methods. A qualitative literature-based inquiry supported by ERIC database and Scholar Works use thematic coding to synthesize research into 4 key themes that inform both the literature review and instructional implications for contemporary K-12 art education. So for the literature-based inquiry, I employed a qualitative literature-based research design rather than collecting original data. The synthesized peer-review research to examine how sketchbooks and visual drawing support creativity, reflection, risk-taking, and artistic growth, in K-12 art education. Connected scholarly findings with personal classroom experiences to inform future instructional practice. The ERIC database, also known as the Education Resource Information Center, was a primary research database that I've used. I was able to locate peer-reviewed journal articles, practitioner research, and educational studies related to sketchbooks, visual journaling, creativity, reflective practice, and art education. I used targeted keyword combinations to identify relevant K-12 research across multiple educational contexts. Scholarworks in the Landman Library at Arcadia University, I was able to access full text scholarly articles. I was able to expand the literature base by including research from elementary, secondary, and community-based art education settings. I was able to ensure sources were credible, relevant, and aligned with the inquiry question. Qualitative coding process. I was able to read and annotate each article multiple times to identify significant ideas, instructional strategies, and reoccurring findings. Use qualitative thematic coding to organize the literature into 4 major themes: creativity and idea development, reflective thinking and meaning making, risk taking and resilience, identity development through visual expression. I continuously refine themes by comparing studies and connecting the research with classroom observations. Now for research process, the research process moved from a focused literature search to thematic qualitative analysis, revealing 4 interconnected themes that guided the study and informed recommendations for contemporary K-12 art instruction. I'll start with my flow chart. Was the inquiry research question, then led the search for scholarly literature, so that I was able to select peer-reviewed sources, read and annotate the articles, did a qualitative coding of reoccurring ideas and themes throughout the articles. I was able to identify the 4 major themes, and then lastly synthesize my findings. The database research, I began with the inquiry in question: how do sketchbooks and visual journaling support creativity, risk-taking, reflection, and artistic growth in contemporary K-12 classrooms? I conducted extensive searches using ERIC as a primary database, with additional full-text articles from Scholarworks in Arcadia University's Landman Library. These keywords included sketchbooks, visual journaling, art education, creativity, reflective practice, artistic identity, risk-taking, and inquiry-based learning. I also used the quote-unquote and search feature to be able to narrow down the amount of results in order to reach the articles that I needed that would help answer my inquiry question. The coding and themes. So I read each article multiple times. If something caught my attention, I would highlight it. I was able to annotate important findings, instructional strategies, and recurring concepts. I was also able to compare similarities and differences across the studies. Use qualitative thematic coding to group related ideas into broader categories. Refine codes by continually revisiting the literature and comparing findings with classroom experiences. Throughout the coding process, I began to recognize themes that tied literature together. Under those same themes: creativity, idea development, sketchbook encourage, curiosity, exploration, and idea generation, reflective thinking and meaning making, visual journaling supports reflection and makes students' thinking visible, risk-taking and resilience, sketchbooks provide low-risk environments that normalize experimentation and revision, then identity development through visual expression, students develop artistic voice, personal identity, and cultural understanding through visual storytelling. Key findings. The findings demonstrate that sketchbooks and visual journals transform the art classroom from one focus on finished products to one centered on creativity, inquiry, reflection, and lifelong artistic growth. Sketchbooks are essential instructional tools, not simply places for preliminary sketches or drawings. They support creativity, reflection, risk-taking, resilience, and identity development through process-based learning. Meaningful artistic growth occurs when students are engaged to explore, revise, reflect, and express themselves over time. Key finding number 1, creativity and idea development. Sketchbooks promote creative thinking by encouraging students to brainstorm, experiment, and revise ideas, giving students the opportunity to experiment with different media and express their thinking in multiple ways, emphasizing the creative process over producing a polished final product, not just during planning, but to encourage brainstorming, experimentation, revision, and ongoing creative thinking. Creativity develops through an ongoing process of inquiry rather than producing a single finished product. Key finding number 2, reflective thinking. Incorporate regular sketchbook reflections during projects, encouraging students to document observations, explain artistic choices, and connect their work to personal experiences. Have students revisit their earlier sketchbook entries, revise previous ideas, and use their journals to demonstrate how their thinking changes throughout a unit of study. Sketchbooks document students' thinking, decision making, and artistic growth over time. They provide valuable insight into learning that may not be visible in a finished artwork alone. Encourage students to combine visual and written reflections in their sketchbooks using artist statements, annotation, quick writes, and visual responses to document their thinking throughout the creative process. Key find number 3 for risk-taking and resilience. Sketchbooks provide a low-risk environment where mistakes are viewed as opportunities for learning. Establish classroom norms that celebrate experimentation and growth. Use sketchbooks as low-stakes spaces where students can freely explore ideas without the pressure of grades or producing a perfect final piece of artwork. Students become more willing to experiment, revise their work, and persevere through artistic challenges. Encourage students to embrace mistakes, test multiple solutions, and view unsuccessful attempts as opportunities for learning rather than failure. Integrate sketchbook activities that ask students to generate several possible solutions, revise compositions, and reflect on how their ideas evolve, reinforcing perseverance and creative confidence. Key find number 4, identity development through visual expression. Sketchbooks help students develop artistic identity and personal voice. Students use visual journaling to express experiences, emotion, and cultural perspectives. Artistic growth occurs through sustained engagement with meaningful ideas and self-expression. Encourage students to use sketchbook as personal visual journals where they can connect artwork to their emotion, experiences, and identities, reinforcing that art is a meaningful form of self-expression rather than simply a classroom assignment. Create opportunities for collaborative sketchbook exchanges, feedback from peers, or artist reflections that help students communicate their ideas while learning from the perspective of others. Implications for teachings. This research demonstrates that integrating weekly sketchbooks into art instruction transforms them from simple planning tools into powerful learning environments. Through consistent visual journaling, ongoing reflection, and artist statements, and process-based assessment, students become active participants in their own learning. Rather than measuring success solely by the quality of a finished work, teachers can value students' creativity, experimentation, critical thinking, perseverance, and personal growth. These practices foster artistic confidence, encourage meaningful self-expression, and help students develop the habits of mind necessary to become reflective, resilient, and lifelong creative thinkers. So we have weekly sketchbooks to be integrated as ongoing learning tools, not just learning materials. Use them consistently throughout the school year for brainstorming, observation, experimentation, revision, and personal expression. Establish a routine of weekly visual journaling to document students' artistic growth over time. Embed reflections throughout the creative process rather than only at the end of a project. Use prompts such as, what new idea did you discover today? What artistic risk did you take? How did your idea change? Help students become more aware of their creative thinking and decision making. Students can create artistic statements. You guide students in creating artist statements using sentence stems and reflective prompts. Encourage students to explain who inspired the work, what they created, why they made the artistic choices they made, how did their ideas develop. Strengthen students' abilities to communicate their artistic intent and creative process. Assessment. Assess the creative process, not just the finished work. Use sketchbook as evidence of idea development, experimentation, reflection, revision, and artistic growth. Value students' willingness to explore, take risks, and persevere alongside technical skill development. Throughout this inquiry process, my thinking has changed. This inquiry fundamentally changed my philosophy of teaching art. I began this research viewing sketchbooks primarily as organizational tools for planning artwork. Through examining the literature and reflecting on my own classroom experiences, I now see sketchbooks as powerful instructional tools that support creativity, reflection, resilience, and identity development. This shift has transformed how I define success in the art classroom, from producing polished final products to cultivating thoughtful, confident, and reflective artists who learn through exploration, revision, and meaningful self expression. Now, before the inquiry, I view sketchbooks were primarily planning tools used for preliminary sketches, practicing techniques, and organizing ideas before creating a final artwork. After inquiry, sketchbooks are essential learning environments where students explore ideas, experiment, reflect, revise, and develop artistic identity through the creative process. Before the inquiry, I believe that reflection happened at the end of an art project as a way to evaluate the finished product. After inquiry, I now believe reflection is continuous, occurring throughout planning, creating, revising, and problem solving, making student thinking visible all over time. Before the inquiry, mistakes were often viewed as something students tried to avoid, and many feared making the wrong choice. After the inquiry, I believe now that mistakes are valuable learning opportunities that encourage experimentation, resilience, and creative problem solving. Before the inquiry, success was measured mainly by the quality of the finished artwork. After the inquiry, success includes creativity, revision, reflection, perseverance, artistic confidence, and growth throughout the process. Before the inquiry, sketchbooks were mainly at the beginning of a lesson for brainstorming. After the inquiry, sketchbooks should be integrated throughout the instruction for brainstorming, observation, experimentation, reflection, revision, and assessment. Before the inquiry, assessments focus primarily on the final product. After the inquiry, assessments value the entire creative process, including the idea development stage, risk-taking, reflection, and artistic growth documented in the sketchbooks. Sketchbooks and visual journaling, I found 5 conclusions to answer the question, how do sketchbooks and visual journaling support students' creativity, risk-taking, reflection, and artistic growth in contemporary K-12 art classrooms? Number 1, sketchbooks are sites of thinking, not just drawing. Across the literature, sketchbooks function as active thinking spaces, not just for preparation for a polished and finished piece. Number 2, creativity is a cultivated habit of mind. Growth comes from repeated, low-stakes chances to experiment. Artistic ability is not innate talent alone, but can be cultivated. Number 3, fear of failure is the door, sketchbooks are the keys. Separating exploration from the evaluation makes mistakes visible and expected, not hidden. Mistakes are praised and not used to hinder one's creativity. Number 4, reflection is continuous. Reflection is throughout the entire process. It should not be saved for the final product. Number 5, sketchbooks build identity, not just skills. Visual journaling becomes a space for personal narrative, culture, and self-discovery. My role is to intentionally design learning environments that nurture creativity through curiosity, reflection, and meaningful exploration, enabling every student to develop the confidence to think creatively, make meaningful connections, and express their unique artistic voice. Next steps. This inquiry lays the groundwork for classroom-based action research. It moves from what the research says to testing it in practice, turning a literature-based inquiry into lived, data-informed classroom action. Building on the literature review, the next steps include classroom implementation, embedding sketchbooks throughout every phase of instruction, not just as warm-up, establishing weekly journaling routine, normalizing revision and risk-taking as core classroom culture, and redefining success to value process alongside product. Action research, implementing these practices in the classroom over a full year and being able to collect primary data, sketchbook entries, observations, student reflections, and photographs that this literature-only study lacked. Future studies, expanding research to younger learners. Most existing studies focus on secondary and adult populations, and piloting a cross-grade collaborative sketchbook exchange inspired by Brass and Coles in 2014. Classroom implementation, immediate practical changes to my teaching practice. Embed sketchbooks throughout every phase of instruction, not just as a lesson warm up. Students will use them at the start of a unit, activate prior knowledge, generate ideas. During the instructions, they'll be able to test compositions, experiment with media, recording inspiration, and at the end, they'll be able to revisit entries to trace how their ideas change over time. Also, can build a consistent weekly journaling routine at least once a week, so the sketchbooks become continuous records of thinking rather than isolated preliminary sketches. Normalize revision and risk taking as classroom culture. Regularly celebrate pages where students change an idea, solving an unexpected problem, or learn from a failed attempt rather than only praising polished final products. Embed short, recurring reflective prompts. Throughout each unit, ask, what new idea did you discover today? What artistic risk did you take? Use label drawing, sentence stems, or short discussions depending on the grade level. Design culturally responsive, open-ended prompts. This invites students to connect art making with their own lives, family traditions, and communities, allowing for multiple valid interpretations rather than one correct response. And redefine success and assessment criteria. Include willingness to experiment, reflect, revise, and persevere, not just the quality of the finished piece. Action research, immediate next study. Implement the revised sketchbook practices in my own art room. And track how students respond over a full academic year. I'll be able to collect primary data that I didn't have access to for this project, such as sketchbook entries, student reflective writing, classroom observations, photographs of student work, and formal conversation with students. You can also focus questions for this phase. How does regular sketchbook use affect students' willingness to take creative risks? Do students have confidence in generating original ideas? Are students able to reflect on their own artistic growth? I would be able to compare findings against this literature, review 4 themes to see where the classroom evidence confirms or complicates the research under creativity, reflection, risk-taking, and identity. For future studies or the long-term research directions, more research with younger learners. Most existing studies, Cummings, Williams, and Shields, to name a few, focus on secondary or adult populations, so elementary level evidence is thinner and worth building out. A cross-grade or cross-classroom collaborative sketchbook project inspired by Brass and Coles in 2014 find that collaborative sketchbook exchange supports reflection and creative exchange. And formal classroom-based action research design utilize interviews, surveys, and artifact analysis conducted specifically to test sketchbook impact, filling the primary data gap this literature-only study could not address. And thank you for listening in and watching this presentation. I hope you learned a lot about sketchbooking in classrooms, and hopefully you find a way to implement this into your classrooms.